30 years ago, when strange things started appearing around town, nobody was afraid anymore. Today the monsters weren't even an issue because these blessed heroes handled them all effortlessly. It was also the beginning of a new world sporting team. So my brave man stepped into the arena while the roaring crowd cheered and their lights flickered to make sure he looked sharp. The moment he took the championship title made him look like the real deal, but after that went on the court, everything felt just right back home. Our hero felt crushed because everything he did was suddenly ignored for two very basic reasons, causing him to throw his phone out in a loud burst of rage. It all happened right before that man sat down and looked directly at him. The man finally stopped talking about his final days and spoke directly to Chang'an, telling him he had reached a turning point in his career and offered to let Christopher go home to play games while he focused on building his business again. He added that he was reminding Chang'an of his duty as a soldier just before he left the battlefield, making Chang'an's mind jump back to danger. It felt so awful then, and the world looked like a scene in a movie where someone gets fired right before they even get their turn on screen. He knew, deep down, that someday he'd have to let his sharp skills fade away because his youth wore him out. If it ever came back to haunt him, asking someone to take over as a manager with no power would be a scandal if he had been leading the team alone all this time. Christopher slammed the table and fired up his fury before spilling all the coffee, almost making his boss disappear while he said it all over again. The boss snapped because he felt the hero wasn't being respectful anymore. Instead of showing honor, the hero had been ignoring what fans were demanding for him to take time off. As a young man stood frozen when the manager suddenly said, "I didn't make this out of you," his eyes widened and silence stretched into a long pause before he whispered back, "No." He swung his arms around the terrified man and grabbed him by the collar, turning back with angry fury. Christopher reminded his boss that he was the man behind every great achievement at the place they run. One day, our hero woke up and felt so sorry he had been convinced by his boss to start a huge team that could boost his skills forever, yet he couldn't keep doing it after all along. The businessman said, "I did exactly what I thought would work best for this young man." Christopher froze in his chair and laughed nervously as he felt the coldness leave him, knowing that everything was about to change forever. He knew perfectly why the boss hurt him, but realizing he'd beaten someone up wouldn't fix how bad their relationship had already gotten. It felt so much worse than anything before. My friend's friends were laughing and joking, but he was sitting on the floor crying about his latest loss. As this final chapter sealed his epic journey, he felt his power fade away just like a fading flame, leaving him helpless even with a strong hand on his shoulder. The sooner he got his skills activated, the harder it would be to fix how he's been stuck on this. Christopher started wondering if life was really worth living. He started thinking about whether death would truly bring peace when he walked across the street. Suddenly, the driver slammed his brakes and slammed his hand against the steering wheel as he hit that speeding truck, sending the world spinning like a trapped bird in an instant tunnel. Christopher decided that even though his life might genuinely hold purpose, he couldn't do anything about it because the damage was already done. And then the truck hit its own path, only to smash into a tree across the street and explode with fire everywhere. He woke up at a staggering cost, his body trembling from the shock of waking up after all those hard years and trying to fix everything he had left behind. His clothes burned like fire as he hit the dirt, causing him to pause and wonder deeply about what really matters in life, knowing he would have to fight just for another bit of strength. Christopher wanted everyone to adore him one last time as he won their championship match. The hero wanted to gather all the happy moments from his teammates so they could celebrate together. He felt the sudden rush of dying, but then a deep, quiet regret hit him. What if I forgot what I loved? That would be shameful, he thought about silently as the world faded away around him. Just as the protagonist turned around in his room, the strange atmosphere made him feel wrong, so he rushed to check his reflection only to discover that he looked like his middle school self instead of who he thought it was. Just then, Mrs. Henderson opened the door and asked Christopher if he was ready. Our hero remained shocked because his mother had also suddenly regained a youthful appearance. The lady asked her son if something was wrong, and he immediately swept it away like a quick, safe habit. It was Christopher's turn to rewind time. As he stepped out into the light with a young man who was already laughing at how much he had achieved in his life, the only thing that changed for him today were those same foolish choices made in his youth. His knack for spotting predators wasn't based on intuition. It came from pushing hard and using powerful technology to get there. Yet, even though this new machine could see the trick of the Awakener's mind better than anyone else, it couldn't tell them what they needed to do anymore. So he began to think about how to use those hidden spells again. That quiet evening passed like a dream when our brave hero, having no worries about the day's troubles, curled up in his comfortable chair with a single phone open, watching the numbers dance across the screen as if he was reading something far more important than what lay ahead. Even though his full bloom had finally faded back down to a terrible, Aiken didn't worry about it, because he knew how to train and buy the equipment just like before. Yet his biggest trouble was still figuring out how to survive in his pathetic body and weak abilities. He stood frozen in the room when an angry argument erupted from the other person's mouth and eyes. The father insisted that his child could live freely if he lived by his own rules, but his mother blocked him because she believed the boy was too young to reach such dreams on her own. Consequently, they agreed to send him away for 1 year just so he wouldn't fail his classes and never succeed in a life that might very well stay unachieved forever. The moment she remembered how she once stood up for him against his mother's advice meant nothing in his life, because he simply had no energy to spend arguing with anyone else. Wait, what was happening? It suddenly clicked on him when he realized someone was saying 1 year counts as a big deal. He looked down at the truth his mother spoke and imagined a world where years ago, a hunter had played hundreds of matches, earned experience, and climbed to be ranked just by thinking about starting early. Now he burst into the room yelling that he needed 6 months before she could see him. The woman felt a sudden spike of worry as her partner suddenly smiled warmly at her. Christopher stood up and shouted, "I will show my mother my skills." But then our hero stopped, looking confused because they were told no one could see him anymore. A brave little girl said she needed her own person's hand to get into the room without anyone else knowing. It slipped through his mind that the man was already past 18 and had passed all those years of life, making him feel very annoyed by the fact he couldn't train today. And just as Chris was ready to ask for help from that area, someone gently nudged his shoulder and told him, "Hey, it's Dojin Kim. I know why you're here." The protagonist, a brave close-range hunter, found his ordinary life bright and full because he was part of that special group of elite soldiers who worked hard even when they didn't make it to the very top spot. So, our brave hero had to tell his friend he didn't know him, because at first they were meant to be completely strangers. Instead of saying hello immediately, the young man stood up and introduced himself proudly, telling them their classes were next door and that he was a star in the school's class. As the main character said he'd never met the guy, the young man stayed stunned and wide-eyed. So Dojin Kim stepped out into the morning light and noticed that the protagonist wasn't actually there anymore. Instead, a team of guardians had been sent in specifically to manage the Hunter Youth Club. He tried to explain why he couldn't find anyone for training, but they told him instead to go straight back home, leaving his friends behind as if nothing happened at all. The boy learned that his master had powers, but his heart only wanted to learn how to fight with a new friend who never knew him before. Even though it was a bother, he chose to take it anyway, because no real danger seemed possible. So he said, "Well, you know what? The lady asked me to go into training room 3 because I knew someone at the youth club was ready to become her guardian." Later, a voice told the hero his heart broke when he realized another person had come to the school hunting for him, making him go very quiet and surprised by what they were doing. Dojin Kim admitted once more that he couldn't fit in because most of his classmates are older and strangers who never enter a training room. So when he asked our hero why they use one, we learned that their entire obsession with the Hunter League was likely the cause for everyone's lack of interest. Christopher finally checked out the boy and asked him directly if he really wanted to continue watching him train every day so he could try a real test of his abilities. And yet, when Dojin Kim offered a helping hand to his friend, the main character immediately understood that he was so desperately seeking praise from everyone else. But even if that didn't stop her heart from beating as fast as ever, she still refused to let the idea of the boy growing up take hold once more. With that moment, everything was set. The training session had been programmed, and suddenly a brilliant light erupted from the screen, almost blinding Dojin Kim as he watched his own clone appear. This small group of animals would definitely become your training soldiers. And yet, the moment he closed his eyes and let out a roar of pure power, his massive shield didn't just strike. It slammed right into him like an impenetrating wall, stopping every single blow before he could even try to push through its sheer strength. Dojin thought the program had made him train wrong. So instead of fighting the tank, he suggested using a regular clone to avoid it being scratched. When Christopher arrived and asked about his schoolmate's words, Dojin confirmed that the dummy was actually tough, while Christopher cracked a wild smile at the truth. Christopher tried to smash the tanker with a stronger club because it was just too tough, but now the hero is stuck with only one way to knock it down, trying to hit its joints. And that's exactly when Christopher launched himself for his very first spear thrust. He managed to punch right into the tank's chassis and made it all feel like an easy victory. So he made a bold move to use his all-powerful vision to find where the training dummy was breaking down. Christopher spent a quick moment before slamming down on his virtual monster, knocking its arm and waist into the dirt as he struck the final blow. Just then, that unbreakable dummy crumpled into pieces, marking Christopher's win, though he quickly regretted filming it all along. Donna Kim said she won her ship because she cut the tank's armor down just enough so no one could stop it. But if the enemy had been ready for a different plan, they might have needed a special tool instead of just their regular gear. It was a funny moment when the boy looked at the kid and said, "We don't need to explain this." Dojin Kim said the great man, who is known for his incredible spear skills, deserved to join the U squad, so he decided to practice with a dummy in the ring. Christopher watched his young apprentice struggle with gravity and physics until Dojin Kim, exhausted and bewildered by Christopher's exact movements, realized that even a clumsy clone could defeat a monster if they just pushed it to its limit. That very next evening, the operation continued in full swing. A middle schooler tried to get his programming right, but when a senior in the club yelled for proper welcome, he had to gracefully bow over it all. Just then, the young man spotted his teammate struggling with a tanker clone, so he stepped in and explained how they needed to warm up first. That's when Jisoo called him out for trying to be a training dummy, while the young Kim insisted on never damaging it again, even if their defense was set to its lowest level. The hero didn't see a big power plant. Instead, he was thinking about how little strength he had left after taking a ride in a train that promised to give him his usual military gear and training. Our lone hero swung wildly after finding the bad guys in the Hunter League and also spotted the mysterious partner nearby. He realized he needed more strength than the bad guy's superpowers could give him, because looking around at everyone else showed that only a single I can see everything and stop anyone from using dangerous moves. As a handsome man with tough muscles who looked far better than most MCMER competitors, he decided to focus on building up his strength right away and started thinking about how quickly his full bloom could help him recover from everything else. Christopher knew practicing was his secret weapon for gaining power. He couldn't wait until the hunters approved their request to go into the training room, because it was a very inconvenient spot. And then he grabbed his phone and wanted to go back home, but the line suddenly rang with Dojin's voice, sending him immediately into action as if chasing the wrong person again. The young man sprinted forward and yelled, "I'm not ready for training yet," as he turned to the protagonist and said, "Let's go have dinner instead." A minute later, Dojin Kim waved enthusiastically at his schoolmate as they walked into the best hangover soup stand. Christopher pointed to the young man and said, "You have to load him," and then immediately confirmed his claim. The young Kim smiled because his rich family had saved him from taking that tough job, even though the equipment and tests for the hunt cost a fortune. Then again, our hero didn't hesitate to see how the middle schooler in front of him had exactly the same hunger for attention as his first life had. He then asked the young man to cut straight to the chase and couldn't quite understand what he was doing. So Christopher said that this invitation today came from some kind of pity. Dojin Kim insisted it was not true because he was genuinely trying to find a way for his hero to help. He walked over to the table where the waiter was waiting and asked if he could sit down for a drink while figuring out what was going on. Dojin tried hard to stop the tanker clone from taking over his ship, but couldn't beat it because he copied that prodigy's moves instead, so he asked him for help instead. But just as he paused his talk, he looked down in surprise at a strange idea that captivated the hero, sparking a new thought across the room. Suddenly, 3 young men dressed in a style reminiscent of Dojin Kim stepped into the dining room and started slapping each other around while making fun of him. He felt a sinking feeling as he watched his classmates mock him over his attempt to beat the tanker clone. Jisoo showed his old friend why he wanted to train so hard, but when that idea slipped his mind, he just ignored everything about the plan and left it alone. As the mockery continued, the protagonist saw that the Dojin Kim's elders were blocking his path, so he decided to speak up loudly about how one doesn't need to change settings just to stop a tanker clone, even though it wasn't hard at all if you knew the right way. The hero loved the way his friend fought that tough guy so hard that no one could say they could turn him back over. Seeing how those people were actually too weak to do it at all, causing Jisoo to trigger that moment of weakness in the end. The young man jumped when he spoke about the school, but his friend stayed silent before it could get out of his mouth. Jisoo stepped forward with a serious tone and told his teammate to wait for a moment. He then called out our hero for bad-mouthing them and claimed that an attack from a Awakener like him could easily kill the protagonist before giving him 3 seconds to do what he must, making Christopher feel odd because Jisoo was acting just like an average thug in movies. The protagonist felt annoyed when he noticed his own meal wasn't ready, causing him to get out of bed and stand tall in the kitchen. Christopher casually punched his friend in the face and made him stumble back. As they scrambled to help get up, the legendary player began thinking about how he'd taken the time limit by always aiming for the first hit, which only made Jisoo grow angry and leave him alone to be triggered. The hero told his friends, "I'm your friend, but we're totally different people, so I need to let you be my own person." The young man dared to strike the hero, just in case he'd dodge gracefully. Christopher recalled Gio's move, but his own punch blocked him instead, as the hero immediately countered back with a powerful left jab. The brave hero felt his hands were slipping because he hadn't won that fight yet. So, thinking it would be funny for everyone else to watch him lose, he turned and shouted something that made the whole place go quiet. Jizu then began to gather his mana. The protagonist's glowing eyes scanned the collapsing floor, his heart hammering against his ribs as he saw an escape route only he could see before it ended. He charged forward and dove for cover, hoping he would be safe while the earth shook beneath his feet. As he looked down at the floor where he stood, the hero knew exactly how tight it was against gravity and decided to use his powers right there, even though everyone else was rushing away to help him. And then that young man let out a big burst of excitement when he finally did what he had been working hard for. To finish his escape with the final blow, our hero barely managed to dodge an incoming gravity strike before a giant table slammed into him, knocking him out cold in the process. Christopher tried to be gentle when the young man was attacking, but the grabby wielder grabbed him right away and shouted that the time had ended. Suddenly, Christopher realized his dodge wasn't enough. He swung a heavy plate from his chest so hard the opponent cracked out a laugh before letting go. The hero's eyes widened as he felt a sudden surge of hunger for a full meal, yet Jizu firmly told him that no amount of tricks could keep him from enjoying this generous treat right then and there. The protagonist who kept hitting plates insisted they all have a cooldown period before he could finally use them, causing Christopher to realize that his enemy would be overwhelmed when those cooldowns didn't hit. At that moment, Jizu's trembling hands signaled a desperate need for help as his gravity manipulation failed completely. We saw him strike back with a heavy plate because he couldn't wait to use it again or save himself. Seeing this, our hero's careless actions only made the situation worse, and suddenly Jizu realized that the hero had vanished into thin air. Suddenly, a loud scream erupted, knocking over the boy's head and making him scramble back in confusion about where the noise was coming from. Suddenly, someone punched us hard. Then Jizu ordered him to face the head while we all cheered in horror. The startled boy looked up and realized a threat was approaching. He immediately covered his stomach with a sense of panic before Christopher's punch hit him hard, sending chaos through the crowd as the protagonist screamed while thrusting his fist into the air. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the young man finally fell into a deep slumber and passed out completely. So our brave hero stood still and stopped the beating while everyone else started rushing around. It was a sudden shock when an unexpected thing caught his eye and pulled him back into surprise. He looked into the place and told himself he'd never manage to make it all go wrong again. But then again, that hero did his best, and for all of us, he just knocked out the enemy while we stayed perfectly safe. Christopher thought of a plan while he watched two friends and his own companion vanish from that location. Suddenly, a loud rush of traffic made the protagonist jump as police rushed in. With that thought, he started cleaning up, got the bully into position, and sprayed water at him to wake him up. Jizu opened his eyes, only to find the boy sleeping on the ground, leaving him completely confused. Yet even though he was tangled, he decided to take revenge on the opponent anyway. Suddenly, a cop burst through the door while everyone was still waiting for him. Do-Jun Kim pointed directly toward where the officer was standing in the middle of the crime scene. Jizu almost saw the enemy surrendering, but instead, his own prisoner lunged forward and grabbed him by the throat, pulling the stun gun toward the ground to make a desperate attempt at saving him. The hero felt a huge smile spread across his face while being tricked by the officer into sneaking out of every trouble that came his way with the help of the cops. Christopher found himself convinced that the bully wouldn't fight back against his own shame, knowing that admitting loss made him even more embarrassed and unable to stand up for his friend anymore. Even if he finally chose to show his face, the crime scene itself was still trying to fight him back. Afterwards, at the training center, someone started talking about how hard it was for Jizu, specifically that he got scolded by the rest of the squad, and revealed rumors that his fellow teammates are going to be kicked out next week. The happy news came not out of magic, but because justice finally stopped being a threat, and we could safely enjoy the victory. His friend gently nudged his shoulder and said, "Let me know if you'd like a little break before we finish this." Christopher sprinted forward and called out for a second copy of himself, but his heart refused to let him pay the bill again. We saw our brave hero standing straight up against all the hard work, while his best friend calmly stepped forward to say something else about it. Christopher locked onto his weapon and realized fully how much it helped him achieve great things. Specifically that Full Bloom gave him a new talent, which meant he was now holding one himself. With that understanding on his mind, Christopher charged forward, flew through the air, and shouted loudly as he stepped into the fray. Now that he had awakened his calling your attack ability, the hero could shout out any random skill or target to boost his attacks, just like this. Ah yes, We saw our brave hero try so hard to break the bully away from that clone's head just to win. Oh boy. Even though this friend was completely stunned, he immediately started wondering what would happen if everyone else felt like they were finally getting in on the action against that monster. It wasn't just a lack of talent. It was the whole mystery behind why he failed to master it earlier. That very strange trick he uses to force his voice into a loud shout makes everyone else feel as if they're watching a performance where nothing is happening. So, you know why he keeps doing it again and again. Later that night at dinner, it was clear the main character had come up with an idea for a hunter survival audition. Next Generation is the exciting reality show that brings the world's top hunters together so they can finally register and prove their worth to everyone in town. As a worried mother declared a fierce competition ahead, her husband insisted his son could handle it by risking failure, leading to arguments before the family's children. Christopher showed everyone that victory meant getting his own custom gun, a huge payday, and the chance to be part of a Division III squad. The mother told her daughter it wasn't all about winning, but she also knew how tough the reality show would make. Yet her little girl cheered and said he'd work as hard as anyone could, making both of them feel so shocked that they decided to let him go on with his own adventure. A brave hero realized with total certainty that the rivalry would be utterly unstoppable, since this show is designed exactly to pick out the most promising talents from the nationwide contest. The TV show's ambition led to many bad things happening for everyone involved because of that, as they all ended up in the highest spot simply by being picked among the newbies. He decided not to make his parents worry about losing his champion status, knowing that every tournament he fought in during his childhood meant he would win again today. I remember exactly that moment when I saw my hero clutching a pair of weapons and launching himself into an action-packed chase as a new hunter, and it turned out to be a perfect run. Before that moment, we watched 3 people sit down to chat about what they were going to do with their phones. Judge Orojo summoned Minsuk from the Hunter's Next Generation to ask why he chose that specific spot after feigning he didn't want the job. Mitsuki told her friend that despite winning big matches on the world stage, she always wanted to stay home for her homeland instead, hoping to find a really good amateur player there. The third judge, Suiak Min, added that if someone lives up to his claims, they should join the pro leagues, and that the academy is designed to help young amateurs succeed. When Minsak Lee heard this, he realized that the truly gifted people are often the eccentric ones who take a different path and shine brightest when given the right direction. Orojo told the judge that the team must prioritize winning the contest over competing in the league. The woman felt that her view would shift completely once she saw what Ethan could do, yet she chose to dismiss his talent as an equal vote for everyone else. He walked into the TV show's gate and started reading what the new program said would be the next big thing, finding players for the Hunter Leagues. But right away, he worried about the real test taking place before his first audition ever happened. When Christopher looked at the challenging questions, he quickly decided they must please the students, so he answered the first one by saying he had no experience in either academic studies or hunting. He stood up and began to explain his way of leading a group, insisting that he would always take the initiative and make everyone listen. Just as he did, the character finally emptied a cup of water onto the table. Even though our hero had made a huge leap and seemed ready for those auditions, he ended up facing a very difficult written exam instead. Egi decided to fix this disaster by trying a practical test when he spotted something wild. To get past the third part of the audition, he had to click that link right away, and as soon as he pressed it, he was suddenly transported into a new world where his personality mattered just as much as his experience. Now alone in his room, Egi thought about how those skills were built on traits and what kind of master would crush clone waves in 3 minutes. The hero stared at the scale, imagining how his magic would turn into a perfect weapon, then suddenly let out a happy grin and pulled out his first jewel pistol. The hero felt a bit relieved when the plan for a practical test came up, recalling how his favorite weapons from a past life were dual guns filled with arcane magic that he knew couldn't survive in this new reality. Just as the mission was about to start, that same eye of light rushed forward to protect him. So, a first wave of weaker clones burst out, signaling the beginning of the test. Then Christopher fired his weapons so swiftly that he was running at the same time. Meanwhile, a stranger stumbled upon the event and immediately raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Judge Urajo asked his men to confirm that they too never expected such a harsh treatment from him when he watched us perform well. Her friend watched as Christopher, still armed with a gun, tried to run away from the swarm of cloning zombies before anyone else could move. Arano said his responses to the written exam were completely off the charts, and she scolded the guy for treating it like a joke while he ignored the challenge entirely. He didn't have a choice at all when his gun wasn't going to be fired on by the monsters because they wouldn't usually use those special guns to kill anyone in their territory. It's not that powerful against them, so many hunters rely on short-range weapons instead. The hunters often hunt for a long distance using slow weapons like bows and crossbows instead of fast ones like arrows or spears. Minsk Lee believes that only the most gifted Athen can easily unleash a torrent of powerful blasts full of magic energy. And so, he told his boss about the protagonist, who made him feel like an expert while also making his colleagues' jaw drop with shock. Minsicle looked at him, pointing out during every round whether Ethan thought differently about guns than the main character did. Orojo pressed his hand against the table, a gesture that spoke louder than words. He looks like he's lost in an ocean of questions. He looked at the young man with a sneer and said, "You think you're ready to shoot? I just told you not to." Minsk Lee stared intently at the stage while Christopher, who had been expecting such a daring move, gave up on taking the test alone. He watched as the protagonist opted to take the rest of it with one single gun. The judge deeply hoped that he was wrong about Christopher. Meanwhile, someone asked about the outcome of Jisu's fight. Dojin Kim clarified that while the main character didn't take any serious blows, the boy was actually quite tough against him despite being weak in close-quarters combat, because he had a fantastic skill. The guy looked really shaken when he saw Dojin Kim fighting Jizu and asked if anyone else would want to join the TV show, which meant a lot of time had passed since then. One with a blue shirt who was so curious jumped in, saying he'd see what happened without telling him yet. The coach quickly dismissed him because he seemed too busy preparing for the upcoming event, just as Dojin took a short break before getting back to work. Dojin Kim strolled past the corridor and thought about how the mighty wielder would come along to make this show even more thrilling. A bright spotlight hit the huge arena where the star performer's world was unfolding in real time. Our hero stepped onto the stage and immediately asked himself how many years had passed since he began his career in a stadium. And so, he walked over to that old spot again just to face the new challenges ahead. The Hunter Leagues divided into 3 groups, where one team played in towers while the other 2 used virtual reality stadiums. For the first time, our hero couldn't wrap his head around why such huge buildings were constructed. But upon seeing the crowd today, he finally understood that it was all about those real-life moments like reality TV shows. The group in the crowd stared hard at the target, who looked like they were trying to make it out of the room alone. Hang Yin stared quietly as the world held its breath and waited for something new to begin. Hida had spent so much time waiting in a quiet corner that she felt like she was about to be swept away by the storm before the day truly started. At the exact same moment, another third-place runner called Mong Jiang let out his breath, letting the crowd's roar fill him up. Christopher started wondering what the show was like before his first career start in life. But his surprise came when old friends showed up in the crowd too. These familiar faces had all along great potential, which made him wonder if he could still win this competition as well. Suddenly, Christopher heard a loud boom from the crowd and saw Dojin Kim waving at him while sitting in that empty spot nearby. The hero sat beside the boy, who carefully inspected him and realized his own injury had been severe enough to make his group feel so hurt. The hero during Kim knew that the gravity wielder, who had just been put back under a fine warning, would finally come out of the dark and save the day again within 3 weeks. As the man saw the bully sitting in the middle of all the people, his mind went wild with a strange and endless confusion. When his friend told him how pro scouts would be using a new show to pick out academy kids with potential, he needed to match their high standards. Meanwhile, on-air FOB filled the stadium, and the host explained that brave new adventurers were always welcomed before everyone finally got into the Hunter's next generation, as fog cleared just as promising careers began for those amateurs who had been pointed at him throughout the night. And then suddenly, a massive digital arena bloomed right at the center of the football field. The commentator shouted that this show was so good it would find the ultimate hunter alive, while every participant had beaten many other people in their country. Therefore, he told everyone to cheer for these young guys because they were only 1-2% of the nation's future hunters before he handed over 3 judges. He was the very first player in the championship, and he was actually a real Korean hunter who managed to win the top league 3 times over. Minsuk Lee proved that Korea's top hunter isn't just one person, it's everyone. After Suiyak Min sat down for his 3rd judge, Dojin Kim didn't hesitate when he saw the champion on stage instead of a foreign competitor. He noticed the 2 judges were so special because their jobs were exactly like his own job in his old days. And yet, he was certain to win against them both, for the commentator told everyone that amateurs would play in competitions created by judges, and whoever got first to claim the prize would earn $360,000 plus a specially made weapon from Mura's workshop. When he heard this, the hero felt his heart skip a beat because the items he had made for the Mura's shop were worth millions, far more than a custom sword he could barely hold in his hand. He thought we'd win by being faster and smarter. After all, it's not just about running faster. It's about knowing exactly how much the world needs you when everything else is already holding on to you. Arejo took a moment to explain why these 100 candidates were chosen so carefully from the full pool of 4,450 people, making sure they knew exactly what they had to do next. So she told everyone exactly how they'd fight in this scary dungeon where real hunters make sure to kill each other until only 8 people are left. And when all those brave souls finished their last mission, she handed out a big extra reward for the very next quest in that hidden, soulless place. And then 1,000 strangers walked onto the dungeon floor, ready for their first big test. He stepped through the portal with a start in his heart, leaving the hero completely breathless behind. It was only then we stepped into a world where the dead were waiting for us to come back. He started scanning the room, imagining how those grand final matches used to happen when he was actually a kid back then. Christopher felt like he had finally cracked the code on every part of this world's secrets, from its mysterious nature to where the map led, and then looked at a hidden dungeon waiting for him with a big grin before deciding what to do next. It was certain that the hero could not follow the rules in this survival game by forcing them against his own will. He proved his mind by effortlessly taking those practical tests while she wasn't convinced he was a genius. Yet she focused on how hunters rely so many vital survival skills that no fraud could possibly win. Raj-Jo wanted to show the boy that the League of Hunters should be taken seriously. The other two started chatting about those amateur talents, and their clever colleague had made a brilliant decision to send them out alone so that skilled hunters could watch, but then the group immediately realized something strange was happening. As I stared at the digital display, a familiar face began to vanish from the battlefield and reappear just before me, making the game feel like a sudden adventure waiting for us all. The actress stared blankly at a screen where her hero looked like she was wearing a crown, and suddenly the whole world went silent because that very spot was where the deadly treasure actually lay buried deep underground. Artifacts were a series of diverse treasures hidden deep in dungeons, and sometimes just grabbing them meant getting yourself into trouble. Arjo panicked because even Division 1 players wouldn't know that such a ruin was never opened up for anyone else, let alone amateurs. Mincet Lee whispered his concerns to the team before he told them they should step in if there were an issue with the fake dungeon she confirmed wasn't even real. After all, the area was hidden from everyone and never actually appeared on the map. When the man heard this, he immediately asked the woman about those items in the hidden room. After taking a tiny breath to catch his composure, Arejo told them it contained something forbidden by the Hunters League because of its immense power, leaving the other two judges completely stunned. The mysterious object refused to vanish unless the match was silenced. But since everything existed purely within its walls, the only way to use it was to hide it in that secret space, where Arojo had warned the keeper that protection depended on guarding whatever held it. The relieved lady finally took a look at the piece of art. So the courtroom got bigger and hotter, but when they finally saw what was right in front of them, everything seemed brighter than expected. Q, the scary creature guarding the secret item, looked down sadly as he saw his true name in the crowd. As Christopher pushed the heavy stone forward, relief washed over him instantly because the hidden route was now clearly visible on the other side. No matter how much he forgot about it, his brave hero still found the secret dungeon and decided that destroying the guard would be the perfect way to get that legendary weapon for a glorious fight ahead. The keeper flickered in a brilliant flash of light, ready to reassemble and shoot a mighty beam right as the hero slipped through the cracks of defense just in time. The young man woke up screaming at a new day where he had fallen into a trap again, because the keeper was just waiting for him to fight it out in his first true battle ever. Our hero saw that box marked with a futuristic label when he was digging through the crumbling ruins of a tall building. Christopher finally beat that rival in the final match and took the victory, which made him realize exactly what kind of magic was actually needed to unlock that forbidden artifact. So he did just that when he used his magic to make the sword become a crowbar. Christopher felt a strange sense of connection between who he was before and now he's been here. Christopher kicked away the metal cube to avoid hitting the monster's face and used the space between them to grab onto its neck while swinging his crowbar to knock it away. He then flipped back over to get his footing again, knowing that defeating this giant keeper would be a long journey ahead. To make sure the cube didn't turn into a weapon before anyone noticed, you had to keep watching out for every move they made. Like that moment, the keeper reshaped itself into 2 massive hands and saved the hero from being crushed by the monster. The player felt a sudden jolt when they realized they were still in control, even though the enemy had been right next to them for what looked like an eternity. But he cracked his grin, realizing he'd finally caught the chance to save himself before the guard fell apart entirely. Right then, he slipped the stolen fragment between the giant's palms effortlessly. Naturally, a robust piece is just as strong as the rest of his body. The young man picked up that chunk, thinking how obviously it would be the monster that crushed itself by crushing its own flesh. So the hero finally got those hands in the powerful artifact. A magical piece of golden magic, once hidden in a treasure chest, had been lifted back onto a beautiful shrine, and now the hero felt more than delighted to finally hold it once more. The prodigy player made a bold prediction and got lucky. Exactly when he turned his back on the dark void, the artifact of the Lost Souls world fell into his hands. Christopher rushed over, trying to weave the enchanted blade into his hand, but a sudden spark caught his eye. The scene was so beautiful it made him happy, and with a powerful system that could steal a keeper's foot and give him an artifact strength, he suddenly found himself wielding something far more dangerous than just magic. Christopher hurriedly pulled out the gun and checked the sights before firing, ready to prove what he had learned. As he slammed his hands against the heavy iron walls, 3 deep, silent holes suddenly appeared where the guns had been, turning the quiet dungeon into a battlefield waiting for more action. That moment made the brilliant player feel like a god watching over his gun again. He used powerful magicka when he was young because his early years gave him so much reserve that he could fire thousands of tiny, perfect bullets every day. Full bloom wasn't turned on yet, so his new power only helped him get ahead for a bit while draining his usual magic energy. And yet, as he tested his new pistols, he began to think that the artifact he had just found would allow him to ignore his lack of mana. Upon examining the wall, the hero realized that he could handle pistols, yet wasn't ready for heavy artillery, even though they let out a smile, as his current capabilities were more than enough to carve his way. Meanwhile, upon watching this from the monitor, the 3 judges were left amazed and speechless. Aurora stared in horror at the young man, who had simply pulled a gun and fired once more after that last time. The first judge pointed out that our hero had a very strange way of avoiding the guard's attack, which really caught their interest. The third speaker said he couldn't predict what the machine would do, because even if he knew how much we were trying to see, we probably wouldn't notice the trick at all. Orojo explained that pros could easily pull off this trick because a beginner thought it was impossible. Yet, in her mind, the hero had a clairvoyant skill to help him tackle the keeper's guard with just 1 shard of his own body instead. It was amazing and baffling for everyone to see, so she let out a frown at the incredible feat he had achieved. The woman finally remembered what she had heard about those mysterious hunters. Back in their forgotten land, the young man sprinted across the branches so fast that it looked like pure magic. The young man climbed higher, finally finding himself with the best kill score and leading the way through Team 1's top plan when they arrived at the private academy in the capital. The ball swung high and caught the net, but Hangulin didn't care about winning. She was focused on the final challenge ahead. It then appeared to a young man that no one could stand in his way while he walked through the forest, and suddenly loud gunshots rang out, leaving him shocked and wondering if he was too late when 20 contestants should have been eliminated before the end of the round. The hero smiled because thinking about winning meant losing everything and failing to catch the last one was an easy mistake. Instead, he chose a very risky goal of finishing only halfway down to get a chance at 5th place. Just as he began to walk past the cheering crowd, an inexplicable force grabbed his eye and made him look back at the stage for a second. He noticed a bully right away as he stepped out of the crowd. Hidden inside the tall green herbs, Jizu kept a secret that made even the smallest herb grow suspicious. Just as the only contestant arrived within striking range, he slammed his fist in a place to grab a tough guy by surprise gravity, then smiled sweetly while vanishing from his cave toward the deadly crater he'd built above him. A sudden tap landed in the air with such force that it nearly knocked the protagonist back, as if they were just about to strike back before he remembered what had happened and turned away from the pain. Ju stumbled back as if he were being pulled by a giant rope, his heart hammering against his ribs in panic before finally landing right where he started. A tough boss asked his friend for help with bullying. And yet, when that loud voice finally came into his ear, he felt a sudden rage in his chest because he had heard something too big for him to accept. Christopher didn't like this fight, but he told himself he was there to help get Jizu out of trouble because of that same attitude. The loud noise of the crowd made me feel furious, but I knew my friend would face it anyway. That was why he had to use his strength right now to crush the enemy's shadow before gravity took him in its hand. The brave hero ran away safely from the scary place, making sure everyone stayed home without a scratch. Christopher thought about the plan. He needed the young person's gravity attack spread across many people instead of just one, so everyone could get beaten down quickly and finish them all together without anyone feeling weak or tired. It looked like a big deal when Jizu said she wasn't ready to go along with it. So you wonder if that's her heart or just her stubbornness. So that's why his friend had no choice but to throw a punch and yell heads right before the villain even saw him coming. So Christopher kept hitting Jizu over and over until it was time to quit. When the bully asked what the guy had seen, Christopher told him he wanted a friendship instead. When the hero heard this, he whipped up a gun with a grin on his face and fired right beside the boy's foot before raising it high over the tall guy's head and shouting that he'd be alright if he didn't want to go along with him. After thinking for a second, Jizu forcibly accepted his role as our hero's trusted assistant, making him happy along the way. Then two young contestants clashed blades in the dark, and suddenly they were knocked down by shadows before they hit their own swords with a sneaky gravity attack. Jizu was furious at first. Just then, a party of two began to flee when someone spotted them. A flying blade launched at them instantly, leaving Jizu startled again. And so, wielding his skill in mid-flight, the giant wielder successfully stopped that flying sword before it could do any harm. Christopher felt a grin start when he saw his own gun fire from another contestant hand, making the whole room go silent and laughing along with the chaos around him. Like that, the small group of two ended up facing off against a squad of four, where only one person stood out as truly the talent. The Hunter League is a fun team sport where players often get into trouble when they aren't good at defending. Despite the bully-wielding, terrifying gravitational power, its greatest strategic move during team fights turned out to be an incredibly defensive play that stumped the judges, leaving them to wonder if they even had a chance at eliminating Jizu, who somehow managed to secure his place on the leaderboard without needing Orojo's help. 3 judges watched as 2 young men spoke quietly together. The lady watched as the young man pulled on a suit to recruit a bully, and her colleague stared at him because, after all, he had never seen them meet before. Minkley saw the boy try to measure his own abilities against the others, and then dismissed the whole plan as a foolish idea. Sui Min says this team works like a superhero squad where the hero can smash every stuck contestant into the dirt with their guns. Yet Minset Lee admitted the battle wasn't as perfect as it looked, showing up against an incredible hunter while D stood alone facing a formidable group. So our hero realized he couldn't rely on clever tactics, teamwork, or gadgets to win a fight that simply wouldn't work. There was no better way to win than to crush your enemy with a flood of people and numbers so big they couldn't even think about fighting back. The protagonist was certain he would fall when gravity claimed him alone from his side. The hero suddenly saw he had finally understood exactly who their team really was. Just as he stepped back from the edge where the flying sword was about to strike him, something else caught his eye and stopped the attack in its tracks. The top player proudly shouted, "I didn't play this fight for years. It's my very first one." The brave hunter said he'd wipe out the hero because he knew exactly what they were doing with those guns. So he fired again, and the hero was genuinely excited for his very first life, using that same sword skill to chop through dozens of blades all at once. Even when he was a teenager, he'd only have one shot at all of that, making the bullets come in even tougher to take down. The mysterious weapon manipulator slipped away into an old tree to hide from shooting arrows, while Jizu sprinted after him and pointed out how the brave hero had relied more on his clever trick than his usual adult fighting style. Just then, the protagonist dodged a sword slash and slammed his gun against the opponent's side, declaring that he was still a green hunter. Chris slipped up behind the hunter and whispered he would surely hit his mark at close range before shooting it away. As the swordsman started sprinting, the levitating blade kept up with him. He used his all-seeing to reveal where the rest of the hunters were hiding so they could finally be eliminated when a friend tried to stop them. He didn't wait to see who came out first. Instead, he charged into the crowd, fired at the top of the stage, and made sure no one got a shot in their face. The moment he looked straight into the shooter's eyes, he saw him gasping for air while clutching his head in terror. A single click sent her flying away, and then the villain finally vanished from the room as a whole. Then he started thinking about himself being the sole survivor, standing in the open, firing that deadly weapon, which turned into a mere scrap of metal as it crashed to the earth beside him. He turned around and fired every gun in the room as if everyone was an enemy. And yet, Hang Yul-yin kept his sword up right as the enemies charged at him. Even though the bullets fired slowly because his own magic was low, the other guy still surprised us with how fast he reacted. But then again, Christopher thought he'd been way faster than him and started shooting a new wall of arrows instead. The brave hunter struggled as the storm of incoming fire slammed into him with no escape. So a young guy continued firing his guns while the other warrior got trapped behind the walls and couldn't move out to save him. He aimed for a stray bullet and fired again, sending it flying straight into the air with incredible speed. It was only a matter of time before that spin turned into a real hit. It seemed the bullet was aiming directly at the hunter who tried hard to protect himself. And then suddenly Christopher began to believe that the win was already won for him. But right then, a loud alarm sounded, and the 20 survivors who had been fighting for the first round were instantly teleported to the podium, causing our hero to look furious at just how badly he had nearly killed that valuable enemy. So, They finally got their turn showing up on camera right then and there. Arjo thanked the contestants for proving themselves as hunters, which only made a small fraction of the awakeners. Her colleague said that they didn't want players for the leave, but protecting warriors like the first hunters who risked their lives on their journeys before stating that the first round must have demonstrated a fraction of the true meaning of the word hunter. With the next round being unveiled 7 days from now at the stadium, the young ones were asked to reflect on their weaknesses and use the free training room. Yet, as the final scoreboard appeared on the screen, our annoyed protagonist was left utterly confused. After staring over the scoreboard and seeing how many people were out, he finally figured he'd only gotten 5th spot and had to let 7 others go, just so he could feel his own pride. As the moment passed, he spotted his own accomplishment and handed over a complete, legendary item for free. Just as we waited for the news, our hero was suddenly called over and told how he had climbed to 5th place. Christopher questioned the young man if he had finally qualified, confirming that everything was left curious by the hero using pistols before he explained how he acquired those guns. The hero answered in a shady way, satisfying his friend, who then asked him about managing to make them fully functional when someone called the protagonist for an interview. Soon as the camera locked onto him, the interviewer asked the young person to turn their gaze toward his face. The young man told me why he wanted to play the role of a superhero, saying he was just the best candidate ever. The man congratulated our hero on passing the first round before asking him for a review. So he said he passed even though his show was terrible. Christopher then got asked if he had found himself any rival within the first round. But when the interviewers stared at him with intrigue, Christopher just shook his head and said none of them really struck his attention. Even though he felt uneasy about using a sword levitator to call off his best rival, he refused to admit defeat by calling him out on being too early. He turned to say so boldly and agreed that it was only funny if he didn't dominate this leaderboard from the very beginning. The interviewer's curious gaze caught his odd, confident demeanor, sparking their interest so much that they decided to continue the interview. Later in the cafeteria, Dojin Kim looked quite mad. Christopher called out to make Christopher show the truth about why the interviewer felt frustrated. Then the hero turned back around to ask Christopher what he really wanted to know. The young guy realized how annoying it was when an interviewer tried to compare him with someone he couldn't even match in spirit, so he kept trying to bully his senior, even though they could barely talk at all. That left Christopher thinking seriously that the person named Dojin Kim might be the real gravity wielder instead of just a random name on the list. Christopher laughed and said, "Oh wow, you just need to make sure your prediction is right, because then your friend will feel more curious about you." He added, "That's why I thought we should have been together all along." Dojin Kim showed everyone that his predictions about Henju and Hangul Yin were right, because those two were top talent from the Academy's strongest squad, ready to jump straight into pro soccer. The blonde friend smiled and said, "I'd be so proud if I'd seen you two fight at the Academy." And so, that moment made Leo furious when his friend pointed out how those two supposed superstars were better than him. Dojin Kim and Christopher laughed at the comment, but didn't change their own ways of thinking. Leo was sure he could never succeed because of that attitude, so he quickly decided to flip a coin and try a different mindset instead. The hero chose to get ready for training right away, so he wouldn't have time to chat with his young friend after they ate dinner. Christopher walked out of the cafeteria, thinking he was just being too strict with his friend. He looked at the group and saw that everyone had all these chances to succeed, even though only a few were left behind. And finally, everyone decided who won based on whether they had truly understood how dangerous a young person could be if they underestimated their power. A young hunter slipped up to grab his hand, and suddenly something strange happened. His partner vanished from sight while whispering a secret about what was happening right then. The hero stepped forward and pointed out a new world for the young one to explore, saying hello to them as they walked. The legendary Han Jin watched as his prodigy's body felt like it had been crushed by a single round of intense training. But that moment soon turned into an instant shift when the new leader, Hangul Yin, stepped forward and told him to keep moving on. And then, grabbing his friend by the collar before apologizing for his rude behavior when he asked the hero to unveil secrets, Christopher felt confused because they were both from the academy and couldn't help but feel like good friends. So instead of just checking stats on the sword prodigy himself, he decided to use his all-seeing eye to check how well they had each other. He threw his cup away and immediately started comparing the academy's record against himself, feeling like a huge gap between them. He knew with total certainty that the single magic ball he held was all he needed to win right now. So every time another appeared on the board, his heart skipped a beat because the challenge had only just begun. After a few more minutes, the announcer said loudly and clearly, "The show will start with such an exciting voice." The director caught their attention as 3 judges started scanning the documents with serious eyes. The students in the Capital's Academy started watching Suya read through that old file. Arjo pointed out that this young man was the best contestant in the race because he looked exactly like the legendary sword prodigy named himself. The little kid, who had almost given up on studying for years after failing his entrance exam twice, said back then, "I just want to be a real hunter," before saying he'd finally turn around and learn from those old errors. Dojin watched the video on his phone intently. His friend had asked him whether the show in Ori would begin, and he nodded, confirming they could air it earlier thanks to those advanced tech developments. The hero pressed to hear the buzz, and, as a surprised blonde looked down at her desk, she explained that everyone was genuinely loving him for being so funny, even though he kept giving boring replies. The other team picked up a few wild and crazy moves when the host pointed out their tricks, so our hero was suddenly caught in action right on the show. He stood up and said, "No, I didn't have any big problems." Our hero nodded as the quiz asked about how he stood up for teammates, and he replied that he never allowed anyone to stop him from leading the whole group. The actor who became known as the sword prodigy didn't get a fancy explanation. Instead, he told the story of how a humble man with an iron fist ended up being cast in reality TV because of his tough exterior and bold moves. When the competition for that top spot started, they all said they had never seen anyone else so good to fight against. That was the moment the world fell silent as the dark curtain dropped over the entire room. Christopher decided to resume his training because his friend told him he wanted to watch the episode on the first round, though Christopher insisted he'd keep watching it later. Do Jun Kim asked the main character why he's been stuck on his bottom. Christopher then turned to his friend and said, "Well, if you look at this from another angle, he's just a marksman." The young man stared at him and asked, "But what's the most important thing a marksman needs?" He replied calmly, "It has to be damage." Yet the other player immediately added, "You can't just shoot so many bullets. You need speed too." The brave swordsman was ready to face off against a rival who could move faster than the man himself and deliver a deadly swing from afar, proving that speed alone isn't enough. You really need someone like him to keep up with every step. Then, someone arrived and said that they felt the world needed to change. So, there were really just a handful of things happening in the Korean hunting leagues that could finally stop the deadly marksmanship from taking out everyone else. He asked the boy if he felt certain about what he had said. Christopher instantly knew he wasn't just standing in front of someone normal. He saw the opportunity to step up and prove himself as the star player for those foreign squads. So he explained it simply, "I'll always be there." When he said it, the hero nodded and decided that training just his legs would be enough. The old man found his heart beating wildly as he heard the young man sneaking around like an intruder, making jokes about how the enemy guys would take over for him if he didn't show up, but the protagonist quickly stopped laughing and just nodded seriously, letting pride be the main reason why so many died. The old man, who spoke of his own decades of wisdom, insisted the duo pause their walk and consider his counsel before leaving, so the curious young people could finally understand what had been going on. Even so, as Christopher picked up his bat again, he decided to make sure the enemy team won't let him off the hook, knowing that a good strike depends on both hitting hard enough and being strong enough to absorb the blow without breaking. Later, the subordinate hurried by the office to find out what was wrong with her boss's game, where she explained that success for a marksman really comes down to two key things: how much damage he can take from bullets, and how well he can protect himself while shooting. But then the boss, Junik Lee, the first-generation leader of the Hunter Association, said it was all true. So the subordinates argued that quality is everything, but when the leader started explaining it, he immediately dismissed them and remembered how a man once asked about just training his legs. He wondered if a young archer would train his power, so when he said the best thing about his job was having strength in his legs, the guy in question thought he might be crazy. The archer told Jim that monsters like the greatest enemies are so weak they can't stop you from chasing them down. Therefore, when a monster appears, your best bet is to move fast and out of its reach before it even sees you. The young archer stood stunned by the simple reason why marksmen are doomed when their hiding spots are uncovered, because he was a fighter who couldn't understand such rules as male fighters do, leading him to finally grasp that mobility is just as vital in sports as it is everywhere else. The chairman knew this concept rarely held up in his country's league, which had lost most of its best hunters. The idea of applying these rules to both elite and global competitions remains a key topic we keep discussing. That moment made the chairman realize how far off-world the young person had gone and what they were seeing in their daily lives. Despite being a newcomer to the Hunter League who hasn't even made her debut, she found herself staring at the screen wondering if the hero had completely outsmarted herself or simply showed off her talent in an absolutely perfect way. Christopher looked at his screen and suddenly felt like he was flying forward because the plant grew back all by itself so quickly, no more waiting for the old speed to return. When plants fully open, they not only boost your stats, but also give you special skills because that is how they reward their hard work and victories. That amazing ability not only boosted your stats, but also gave them a huge boost when you activated them. Did Dojin finally lay down those heavy weights to ask his friend what he was thinking for the post-workout? The guy knew exactly why he wasn't going to train as hard as the other guy. Their stats were already solid, and they weren't close enough right now, so he just told the young man nothing he had to say, while the older one suggested a fight instead. Inside a training hall, two middle schoolers stood side by side, clutching swords, ready for battle. Dojin Kim gasped as he spotted that Christopher had already practiced that knife-throwing trick, and Christopher quickly shared his own secret technique with him. The blonde hero knew exactly how easily he would lose to a pistol user, but knowing he couldn't do it, he decided to win by crossing his blades with steel swords instead. As they charged and the blows met in midair, their faces crinkled with delight as they saw each other's weapons collide. He saw her and her friend look at him, but she only started shaking when he noticed that they were all standing side by side. He looked down at his own hands and said, "That's exactly where I wanted to go." Dunjin felt totally lost because, even though the guy used a very plain sword, he still couldn't get along with him. With that being said, the hero used his arcane weapon transmutation on the sword in order to change its shape. Upon seeing that Christopher had now created a spear, the young one began to realize the gap between them. Christopher then swung his weapon, which his friend immediately blocked. Did Dojo Kim end up facing a much tougher battle? The young boy turned and started trembling, afraid of what was about to happen when his rival finally reassembled his deadly weapon. A mighty sword appeared before him in that sudden, shocking moment. The massive sword struck down upon his shoulder and froze him in place. The tall man looked up, seeing the struggle around him before he even had time to react. Then, a voice crackled over the earpiece. "He's done it." Chris was so curious that he looked for a chance to talk to the person who called himself his rival. The hero found his own tactics completely illogical after Dojin Kim claimed they had no real differences, leading him to laugh as the boy was shocked by that perspective. Christopher looked incredibly serious, which made the young guy feel really frustrated as he saw just how far apart he stood from his best friend. Then, thinking about losing another match, the protagonist decided to give the reason why his opponent had lost by claiming he was taking on a bigger job than he should. Christopher picked up a sword that felt like gold, ready to see who had more strength in him. He told his friend that his sharp instincts and fast thinking were like a deadly knife to his own hand, but he couldn't use it properly against the enemy's weapon. So, the hero said, "I'll switch my main gun into something faster." So when he finally spoke up and took a deep breath to start again, the giant sword in his hand suddenly vanished. The legendary player says he needs to stay ahead of any opponent with a barrage of powerful thrusts. It made that young guy so dizzy and confused when he finally opened his eyes, wondering if he could really handle this sword. That evening, as they stepped out from the training grounds and started talking about their new weapon, a brave hero saw someone laughing at a rogue hunter who had been so proud of him after he fought against a rookie academy student. As the hero watched a badminton player on the court, he felt like everyone else had been caught in a trap because the girl looked exactly like him, which meant she wasn't just playing for fun. She was watching him from behind and making a huge mistake. The awakening master had to be him. Seeing this, our hero immediately thought his badmouther wasn't interested at all. Christopher stood up in his chair, clearly furious at how the young men were treating the weak academy kids with such behavior. The bully was angry enough to make the protagonist explode into a fight. Then, the villainess stepped forward and said, "I'll just let it all hang out." But just then, he saw what happened to that boy. They both scored perfectly on stage 1, and it was all fine for them. Even though the brave hero knew fighting just for himself meant losing, he still refused to let the bad guy catch him with that terrible weapon. They walked together into the center of the training room and stood face to face immediately afterward. Jun knew he could beat him better than any secret weapon because he had always been more than just the best kid ever seen. Jun-sung suggested starting the fight, and our hero immediately agreed on it, knowing that his win couldn't be assured either way. The hero finally pushed the enemy back and saw them vanishing before they could move another step. He jumped back after pulling a long rope and then struck down the hero with 2 sharp knives. The bully laughed at the sight of the hero's back and drew his 2 knives, which instantly struck, shattering the silence in this tense moment. The bullets ricocheted off the shield, giving the hero relief while he looked around for a move against the swinging knife. He was tapping the air with invisible hands while Jansung kept his gun ready to catch those strange bullets shooting from the shadows. He didn't realize his strike turned back before he could see what happened to it. The hero built a new throwing knife and fired it at the bully, who stared in disbelief because he thought the weapon had no real power after all. The sky was bright, and everything was exactly the way the hero said he would make happen when he opened his all-seeing eye. Christopher grabbed a bunch of extra blades and slammed them into the victim as if he hadn't even noticed how the initial strike had erased his own abilities completely. The brave boy Junin ducked under a hero's guard and sprinted away in time, sending chaos flying around him while the man stayed still, stunned by the sudden, powerful stop. Yet the bully couldn't stop himself from falling into a trap and trying to neutralize many targets in one short burst. His weak control meant the knife faded and he missed, causing the protagonist to be struck instead. Just like that, the telepath was hit, marking the true victory of the hero. The whole spar was kept entirely silent until someone spoke up next time. Someone had asked the judge whether that was exactly the one they thought would take the lead. The blonde one looked at Minsk Lee as he carefully pulled on his glasses to make a better observation with his analytical power. The man or hero possessed such a mind that was both brilliant enough for tactics and clever enough for tricks, while their actual numbers looked pretty plain at first glance. Minsk Lee had said exactly that. The truth came out just in time. The blonde girl looked at her judge and thought, I bet I won just by knowing my rival was doing something super impossible. Minsk Lee thought the little boy had a cool trick like the other blondes, or even Sumac Kim, who was already known as the first hunter. Two people needed an amazing gift to see the true power in their eyes. And while the blonde guy argued with the judge about overestimating the young man, Minsk Lee insisted that they were all downplaying his skills. After finding a hidden dungeon in the survival game and revealing where the clones were located, he had already targeted them before talking to him. The judge said that even if someone entered Division 1, they would still think they were returning the original Summit Kim themselves. He asked the boy, do you want me to keep your prodigy under my wing? And got a sure answer from him. I spent time analyzing my data and found out instead that the real thing wasn't the numbers themselves, but what they actually meant. Even though the boy figured out how smart his opponent really is and built a plan to stop him, the man still asked why he had already been on a team. The judge said it was bad because it was set by the sponsors of the show, making him feel annoyed at the prospect of trying again. Inside the training room, the protagonist looked confused about what that achievement meant, yet decided to keep taking his time to figure it out. Dongjun Kim jumped in excitement and said that the guy he was talking about could be our main hero because of this new gun. The hero stepped back and said, it's just silly. When the blonde girl heard his joke, she laughed loud and realized how much bigger he had grown than ever before. Even after Dongjun Kim claimed his swordsmanship was flawless and his advice unstoppable, the story remains unfinished. There is still a massive disparity in power levels between them, which the reader can't help but wonder how they will eventually meet. With that saying, the two middle schoolers stepped out of the training room. The camera crew was already packed into the classroom, ready for their next big show. Just as the door swung open to reveal Dojin Kim, the protagonist was immediately stunned by the gravity of the moment, wondering if this was a lecture or a serious revelation. At the same time, three judges took their seats, and Orojo stepped forward to applaud them warmly, noting that they had trained hard for these 7 days while some struggled to keep up with the pace. Despite that hard work, she told everyone they would make it, and every single one of them was going to get there. Her colleague told us that even though they had the best chance of winning, they felt like a tiny creature compared to the powerful hunters who actually stood over them. The teacher team was set up right at the start because everyone who wanted to join had come over on their own. The judges announced that every teacher had shown incredible skill, proving they could lead young players to success during those tough 3-on-3 matches in the Hunter League. Just as everyone else felt overwhelmed by the teacher's mana manipulation, Sanjun Lee stepped forward and demanded his students show humility instead of mocking him for being rude about the lectures. The judges then confirmed that this round was meant to train the new protagonist into becoming a close-range fighter. When Christopher heard this, he looked baffled. Later on, the gunner still couldn't figure out why he was a close-range fighter. He then noticed that he stood in front of sword prodigy Hiyu and his friends, who were all hunters with great potential. Then the teacher walked out into the training field, his voice dropping to a low growl as he shouted, "Forget every single thing you've learned. We're all just better than those 3 guys who never got a chance at any school." And the instructors explained that during real fights, players might grab cool gadgets like an air anchor or air bit so they can fly around, something only strong hunters can do when their weak side is still stuck on the ground. Christopher stared at the screen and thought, this must mean all the hunters are turning into a huge performance and putting on an elaborate magic trick with those cool gadgets. The instructor then confirmed he couldn't teach a close fighter without first learning those techniques, so the lesson began. The heroes got tangled up with the wires, making their hero wonder how hard it would be to adjust. But before they could even start struggling, he had already mastered everything from the moment he stepped out of his dream world. So he chose to see if those old reflexes were really back after all these years. Just as he was about to start his training session, he spotted the teacher yelling at a contestant who looked so weak despite being meant to be part of the future hunters, then immediately turned to watch another man tangled in his own cable and tell him he couldn't make it to Division 3. The loud shouting made it impossible for our hero to focus. Just then, he looked up and saw his friend struggling to figure out how to get started. No one had explained the right way yet, so he nudged the blonde over to help him and left the boy puzzled behind. As he fell down to the ground, the scene was already full of mystery and danger. Did Dojin Kim call out his friend because he wasn't ready to train, even though the test was coming up? He asked the man to worry about himself because he knew he'd definitely fail. So the boy asked his friend how he should move forward. He told him first to create just enough length for a long rope and then pull steady magic down into it, before finally focusing entirely on keeping balance while riding the horse's back. Once in the air, the core becomes the center of gravity before summoning a cable to throw onto the wall. The hero didn't just jump. He soared through the air with effortless grace, perfectly landing as Christopher watched him. "This is how you move your body when you're flying," Christopher explained, eager to show the audience that one should always keep a steady flow of motion going. So he remembered what his friend had told him just before he threw his anchor straight up against the wall, paused briefly, then leaped out of the way with grace and landed perfectly on his own feet. As the young man cheered with delight that he had finally seen his talent shine, a harsh scolding snapped from the teacher as they were still mid-sentence during their talk. The man pointed at how they had lost their drive and asked who was the hero. Christopher stepped forward and noticed that the man was actually trying to fix their awkwardness. The angry instructor pointed out that the young man's lack of practice proves his hidden genius, but the teacher immediately confirmed this thought while also wondering how it would go for aerial combat training. Since the hero was actually an older reincarnation, he decided to teach him some basics instead of letting him struggle alone. So the man insisted that the test start right before anyone else gets ready. Later, when a special person came to talk about our hero's name on the Malfighter list, the three judges made sure they heard it right before deciding what to do next. Mincet Lee believed that Arojo messed up assigning him to the wrong team, so she told him he had an unusual sense of pride, and that's why she put him in Sanjin. She laughed as her old friend thought, "I'll be the first to show you how to scare a rookie." Arrogant rookie Arojo stared with fury at the chaos, shouting that time had ended and she couldn't let anyone else get away with doing anything wrong anymore. Everything had already turned into a nightmare because her team's main job was teaching these newbies exactly how to snap back to reality. The teacher walked out into the bright classroom and immediately began explaining exactly where the test should be taken so that the air anchor could return to its proper height on the high pole. Sanjun began his official mission and immediately looked up at the crowd, declaring loudly, "Anyone who missed the training session is not qualified to become a hunter anymore." Christopher found himself laughing because he knew exactly why his test was designed to send him flying off the track. Then the hero asked his teacher for a chance at his prize if he could make it through. So the first hunter told the hero that as long as they can win their lessons, they can play whatever they want at all times. Sanjin knew his team would lose if they tried too hard, so he made their ship drop a massive weight just above the waterline, so no one could ever get there before everyone else did. The moment the students failed, the teacher felt so sure he couldn't possibly fail anymore, only to spot a sword prodigy swinging a levitating blade that seemed to defy gravity entirely. He didn't care what the teacher wanted his brilliant student to do, so he guessed the test would still work out no matter how hard they tried. He didn't just catch a surprise. He actually felt the weight of it all along. The scenery had stumped the teacher when the hero climbed up effortlessly using an air anchor. Oh wow. Sanjun stared blankly at that small kid who looked like he wasn't even in the room. Just like everything was heading perfectly fine, the hero's air boots had a sudden hiccup and went wrong. He was so afraid of losing his balance that Christopher suddenly pulled him down, holding on tight while he tried to catch his breath with every pull. He felt sure he'd stop the fall and then immediately rushed up to reach the 100M again. As the hero swung his arms wide for the winch, the teacher stared blankly at nothing but his own hands and said, "You can't do that again." Shortly after, Gene realized he needed to stop explaining the theory and to show us how close-range fighters fight in real life. He decided to start a new story where these guys aren't teaching us about team tactics. They're showing us exactly what they do on the ground, so our hero gets bored of listening to words instead of feeling like a student. Sanjin said he could also be a fighter and fight after the initiators came along. As the hero basted his liberty, the man kept going on explaining that the middle schooler barely knew what authority meant, thinking they had won their bet. The protagonist was so easy to pass at this test because he had been in the hunting world for a long time. His most pressing worry was just that a mysterious note slipped out of his pocket. The anonymous guy with such an intent told him he needed to meet our hero in the backyard at 7 o'clock. So, Christopher had to go find the note for himself. Christopher didn't see a single person waiting at the meeting spot. Instead, he immediately thought something was off and just started laughing it over. Just then, the hero admitted an odd thing while as all-seeing, I spotted something strange, In that very moment, the door slipped open to reveal a hidden staircase. Just like that, he made his way into it when suddenly someone stood right in front of him. Jim Lee, chairman of the Hunter Association. He laughed as he watched the young man cheerfully accept his invitation. Christopher yelled to the person in front of him because he didn't know what to do with those notes. He assumed the meeting might be a challenge to his thinking, so he waited until the chairman answered before he could even ask the question. The old man watched the protagonist like a hawk, watching from the beginning of Hunters through the next generation. Though the chairman noticed far more than that legendary player, who could see everything while he worked out to show off his speed and sharp eye for details. The man stepped forward to impress the prodigy, claiming his secret ability to predict the match's outcome, which made Christopher instantly recognize the true champion. When told by the chairman that this hero was meant to be the top scorer in Lee, he knew he would just be a distant rival. And so, the hero remembers that his master had given him a wonderful view of the day, only to find himself handed over those exact same items right there in his own office. Christopher stared blankly at the door and wondered why everyone knew about this before he even opened his eyes. A lonely old man approached a young person and asked, "Do you want those things?" The boy nodded, clearly yes, watching as the very weapon he wielded back in his first life appeared on the table beside him. Caliber is the legendary weapon our hero had earned for defeating a big enemy. The gun in his hand was so cool and powerful. It wasn't just magic, it was something real, and when he turned it on, the machine actually started to work. Jintek Lee told the old man which way to go, lending the guns away or keeping the ones inside his shop. Then he showed the old man exactly why those weapons were so much better than anything the Mura's workshop could ever dream of making. Christopher insisted that by the time they realized everyone was just a tool, they suddenly demanded the chairman go right back to work from scratch. The old man kept looking at her with a spark of wonder as she tried hard to make him feel important again after he told everyone about his secret. And yet that young man at the table was desperately trying to get to work before anyone else could speak. It's rare things like this have ever happened. So the leader called the Star Stalker over and said, "You're coming in here with whatever you want, even a knife," while watching the room fill up with eager faces waiting for their own weapons to be handed out. The protagonist asked if there would be any benefits for him, causing the chairman to ask if he knew what the Hunter Association offered its members. He confirmed he didn't use it before declining and heading towards the exit as the program was about to begin, leaving the old hunter shocked. The chairman slammed his hand down because he knew the protagonist was completely reckless and had already witnessed dozens of brilliant players stumble into the first division before they got their chance. The hero smiled and said nothing about what he saw, just letting his friend walk away with the S-class weapons after a polite goodbye. The hero stepped out onto the floor and left the chairman alone, stunned by how strange things had all turned out to be. Shortly after, the classroom door swung open and Dojin Kim sprinted inside to make sure his friend wasn't running late. Christopher said he had handled everything himself, so his friend pointed out that he was still overreacting to things like the teacher's lesson plan. The hero smiled and said he'd never get banned again because his time was really important, just like everyone else's. The blonde guy walked over to meet the hero and found him talking to a very elderly man instead of asking about his place. The doubt about Christopher's success felt too heavy when he realized he might actually be able to keep things going if he didn't give in to that very offer, knowing he'd already built a strong foundation of wisdom from before this new chance came along. Christopher couldn't wait to win and became even more powerful while waiting for the Mura's maker to craft that special suit of armor just for him. The legendary player smiled and thought immediately about forming his own squad whenever things went wrong. Shortly after, the judges said they wanted the lessons to be truly useful because those 3x3 fights were about to start in the urban zone. The competition wasn't about who stayed. The winners were let off the hook so they could take their place, while the poor ones got kicked out and left behind alone in the dark. Arejo wanted to know exactly who would win, so when judges said they'd give the winner a mana flow stone to help make it exciting, Arejo got excited and eager to see what would happen. This huge pleasure made our hero smile as he realized that using the mana flow stone was the very key to unlocking his new magic spells. And so, his resolve never wavered as he pushed past the final hurdle to win the second stage of his journey. Minsuki told her viewers to watch the live fights online while confirming that everything was already happening in person. Arejo told viewers that top scorers would get priority on drafting their teams. The judges then ordered contestants to wait while the match started. Finally, they were off-screen. After releasing the stress of cameras, Arjo pondered how his first performance had been amazing yet arrogant, refusing to care about anyone despite his talent. Consequently, he judged any team battle as a major obstacle in his path. Minsuki saw right through his friend's mind and left her bewildered because she couldn't believe the clue was so obvious. Ms. Lee spotted that only 20 players remained after the final battle and felt particularly worried about them fighting together in aerial battles instead of just trying to keep their own skills sharp. That's when she pointed out the prize-winning girl was actually behind the wheel and had been driving her own car away from the race. Regardless of how strong his pack seemed, the lone wolf couldn't escape being eaten by everyone else. Erajuro pointed out exactly why the hero would face tough terrain. He had very few stats, and all those miles of long roads were just waiting for him to sprint across. She pointed out how deeply obsessed her colleague was with the person, which led to a moment where she finally admitted she genuinely believed he had all the potential in him. He chose victory not because victory was good for him, but because it made the most sense as a result of his heart beating fast and trying to beat himself down. The third judge nodded at the first one before spotting how arrogant he looked, like a green hunter doomed by luck. It was a bad move anyway, because even the best player could lose everything if they careless just second. So the second one stepped up to speak his mind about why doom and pride are really one thing when you're leading confidence in leagues that are as competitive as hunting. Minnie Lee said she was ready to watch her brother win a tournament where his team played against a rival group. In the quiet hallway of the waiting room, the protagonist found himself stunned as someone decided to face them first. The manager proudly told everyone he had scored the most in the game before. So he laughed with such wide eyes and gave the audience something totally new. You could see now why that guy was so stunned. Suddenly a powerful attacker got pulled up to his side in a way that made him feel like an actual threat instead of just another player on the squad. He thought his own pride might be making the guy laugh while he picked up the role as a teammate, but then the grumpy weapon man simply watched him and said nothing about knowing who the champion actually is. By the time the game ended, our hero might have been so young at heart that they thought their plan to win this round was just too simple and easy for them. Christopher stepped forward with a sweet smile, revealing his desperate need for help while leaving the other bullies completely speechless and shivering from their own shame as they stared at him. The telepath poked him gently to see if his heart felt ready, and he nodded solemnly, confirming his love for her because she had been the sole reason he'd made it home after all those years. Christopher smiled and told the bullies exactly what happened when they pushed his rules too far. They decided to whisper the news so they could hide it from everyone else, making sure no one saw the penalty on the playground. As he realized exactly what his friends were waiting for, the guy who grabbed him completely stopped breathing and felt so scared that even the world held its breath. That huge annoyance made the protagonist realize exactly why he had been stuck in middle school for years, so he grabbed soldiers and demanded they perfect every single thing he told them to do. Christopher stepped forward with a deadly glare, declaring that his errors were a cruel trap designed to make the enemy win at all costs, causing his entire team to run back into fear. Shortly after the game ended and the opposing team was dismissed when a player became injured during play, the other players were immediately sent to their seats. Christopher stepped onto the airfield and felt an itch in his stomach to start fighting. He rushed over to find his friend at the bottom of the tower and saw him standing alone in a corner, gasping for air as the world fell away around them. He was eager to ask his teammates where he was, and those answers made him instantly ready for his next move. Christopher had a hard time dealing with anything but trouble when he needed to get everyone to the very center of the room, so they ran away from every kind of fight that came along. The hero raised his weapon, imagining a battlefield so crowded he could barely see people, forcing him to draw closer and find his own way out before the crowd swarmed around him. And then a shot went off, causing our hero to duck and sprint away before his friend even asked why he felt so shaken. And the man who spotted him was truly alone, so he didn't even know why he had to take such a risk just to survive. Before he began planning his way to the very top at the center of the map. Later on, as we saw our hero climb up to the top, his friends also slipped away into hiding. Then Christopher pointed out to them from there and confirmed, saying they couldn't see anyone else either. That's why the hero's big plan started right after he made those final moves. And so, he aimed his gun right at the heavens and fired out a volley of bright, thunderous blasts straight up into the clouds. So the hero didn't need any help. He simply stayed calm while waiting for his turn. Then came the first challenger, a friendly man who asked him why he was in town to begin with. He looked at a strange man who was like a friend to him, and his heart raced. Hen turned so bright at hearing this hero fight a tough guy in one-on-one, but his teammate said Hangul had already listened and was ready to handle the gunner himself if he felt strong enough. Then a sword prodigy told Hen to stay calm as he got closer. The moment the hero slipped on the floor and fell into the quiet room made everyone realize they were alone. Then Ham questioned why he had vanished before confirming that despite being the top of the class, he was certain to win any fight with him. Han immediately turned down the plan because realizing how much trouble the hero had in mind, he made a choice to avoid getting hit again and still be happy with his life. So the swordsman shouted, I'll go find my rival and see what they're up to. Christopher hesitated only a fraction as his sword nearly cut through himself, leading him to keep just enough distance from the fight to create a safe escape route, while Han pulled out a quick staff to keep up the chase across the sky. Our hero watched a giant robot fly past like a speeding bullet and let out a breathless sigh before grabbing his rope midair so that the enemy could turn around and catch up with him. Christopher stared as Christopher's swordman effortlessly deflected his shots before he could even see what was happening. When he finally realized this defeat, he decided to pull out his escape route again. Yet it wasn't a surprise because Han is such an amazing contestant, even though his fake gun's power was nowhere near the real one from his very first performance. Christopher's quiet attitude seemed like a weak excuse for being there. Just then, our hero spotted the pair and realized they were no longer strangers, knowing his friend would easily take them down. He pulled his face back and looked at the team with a confident grin. The two kids found themselves trapped together because Jisoo had hidden behind the bushes while Jin Sung followed silently through the shadows of her own home. His friend stepped up from behind him as he began his escape, but when he finally called for them to move, they froze in their tracks and watched him fly away without a single word spoken. As they looked out from their classroom, everyone figured the main character must be setting a trap for them. So, that prodigy threw a punch and ran away before even knowing he was going to do it again. And then the turn of the gravity wielder took shape. Just like Hangyola thought he was making a play mistake, suddenly a strange force swept through him and knocked him back hard. Just as the hero's breath vanished from his chest, he plummeted toward the enemy with a sudden drop in confidence. He didn't panic, so he kept a confident grin on his face. He thought his rivals were about to crush these three heroes before the school's safety nets even kicked in, only for a sudden blip in the air to save everyone from their doom. Oh wow! Just as the air suddenly stretched and a massive invisible hand grabbed your foot, he launched him across the room with supernatural speed. In a web of magic that tore through the sky, our hero fled into chaos, causing Han and Hangul to stare blankly while trying to catch up with each other. He felt so betrayed by the way the prodigy saw him, as if he were an easy target. The two members of Team A were quickly wiped out by the competition. That moment saw an air hook launched straight upward, and when Jisoo asked the team leader if his grabby was too troublesome, they quickly agreed that it was perfectly acceptable before praising his fellow teammate for his own skills. Jinsen then said their plan was passable because he didn't expect his ability to shape itself into a net. The hero realized his plan was perfect because he knew taking out those students one by one wouldn't work well if they fought directly with him. We set up a trap by making our hero act like prey, pulling the dangerous gravity user toward us just as their mind locked onto him, so that the target was unable to escape or react before the telepath finally took control of their fate. Christopher tried not to let his concentration slip away while the game was still fresh, thinking that maybe some of the other team members had already figured out what they were doing and it would just be a bit awkward next time. Suddenly, peeking through the screen, he saw the final guard of Team B have crushed every other squad member in one single attack. So what followed was a moment where everyone suddenly knew exactly who won. The first being the telepath who could hear a thought in his head, the second being the gravity-wielding warrior with iron hands, and finally the mysterious leader of Team C whose mind alone could guide the entire squad to victory. Shortly after, in the waiting room, Han and Hangul were scolded for losing to a single guy, while the scolder fought an entire team by herself. This left Hiju baffled by their poor performance. Soham started babbling about the stats and talking on until his team was left stunned at what he could say. One of those sword prodigies took a hard look at his mistakes and told the hero they should have done better knowing the enemy knew him well, causing the hero to call them out for their selfishness. But just then, teammates came over sincerely apologizing for past bad actions, shocking everyone with that kind of kindness. The embarrassed Jinsen ran away from the scene as he discovered a funny side to his bully. Ardu stared blankly as his own hero swept past the rivals in a way that made him feel like a fool, while the other two judges immediately scrambled to figure out who was actually the real champion and how they could beat such a force of nature. The woman looked stunned when she saw that the test wasn't really testing her ability to plan ahead. Erijiro found himself struggling because he had no idea how to handle such a complex mission, even though his powerful allies knew better than anyone else what they could do against the villains. The announcer signaled the final whistle to conclude round 1, and Team C won their spot with 5 points ahead for an excellent run before making a bold move to invite him to share the stage, promising that everyone in the group would receive a mana flow stone exactly as they had promised. And then our hero felt a sudden wave of relief, knowing that the new skill would bring his masterpiece to life. The commentator then explained how the stones could boost their mana, prompting them to sprint toward the summit of Korea and the globe, just in case, when they later discovered that anyone who lost in the qualifiers had to face a brutal knockout round before any judges even kicked them out based on their wins. Oh wow. A sudden turn changed everything when he looked at the list of fallen participants, completely surprised by discovering that his very best friend had already joined the crowd in pain. The man then explained that in this secure area game mode, contestants would have to work together with someone else. Yet, winning wasn't just about occupying a zone for 60 seconds. It was also possible by eliminating enough people while killing the most, which allowed teams who defeated the greatest number of players automatically to win. The man told us that if the losers had picked among the winners, they wouldn't risk anything for a bigger win. Instead, the finals would happen tomorrow. As he watched his friends try to find a teammate, while two hunters promised victory, Christopher noted Dojin Kim didn't have the skills to be top of the group just then. The blonde one saw our hero and sprinted over to help him, leaving everyone confused. Dojin begged his friend to become his partner, just to teach him how to use a rapier. When that friend refused, Dojin grew furious and turned into an experienced tutor for everyone else. So the man wouldn't give up on that friend. When his hero saw Dojin Kim's puppy staring at them, he couldn't stop thinking about the situation and ended up helping the man just because he felt no need to lose anything. The protagonist desperately wanted that chance to prove his newest reward, so he told his partner to obey him and promised it was over. Then they turned into teens in the knockout fight. Later that night, Christopher finally felt ready to cast the Mana Flow Stone, a powerful item that absorbs mana over time or refines skills by consuming them. Seeing the magic work perfectly like before, he decided to grab it and eat it right away. Instantly, his entire vision was upgraded, along with all the arcane transmutation and full bloom reaching rank D+, which would give him extra perks. The two talents that our hero had received from his achievement from full